Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining. I'm very happy that we have opportunity to meet here today. We will listen to Neil and he will show us Alteryx workflow, but before that, quick intro from myself. So I'm also an Alteryx sales and I'm very proud of that because it's a huge privilege. And together with Bart, we co-founded a company called DataPal. And yeah, if you need some help with the Alteryx, you know where to go.
Yeah, hi guys, and hello everybody. My name is Neil Allen. As mentioned, I currently work as the supervisor for all of our sales analytics for Mercedes-Benz USA. We're based in Atlanta, Georgia, in the U.S. For those of you who know anything about that part of the area or know that part of the world, thanks for asking me to show up today. This is one of those moments where only through the power of the internet, a couple of random people get connected, and next thing I know, I'm here presenting to you guys on a use case that we did, or on a use that we did a couple of years ago. It's a pretty fun little story, and I think shows the breadth and versatility of the platform, which I think is probably my favorite part of the story, but also shows a pretty massive impact in a moment that was, to be candid, a little bit of a crisis. So with no further ado, we'll just kind of jump straight into it. So as I mentioned, my name's Neil. I've been here for about 7 years, and in the last 4 have had the opportunity, or actually last 5 now, had the opportunity to lead and supervise what we're calling sales analytics. We really do all of the new vehicle retail and wholesale and product management, data science and analytics for the entirety of the company. Hopefully you know who we are. If you don't, we can have a completely separate meeting if you've never heard of us as a company, but you know who we are as a company at the end of the day. As Mercedes-Benz USA, we are specifically the wholesaler and distributor of some pretty amazing premium luxury vehicles to our independent dealers in the US. Every single one of our dealers in the US, with the exception of one, is an independently owned franchise. So we own and operate the one in Manhattan, but every other dealership is an independently owned small business or maybe a corporation like an AutoNation, those types of organizations, but they all operate themselves independently. And so we are strictly just the wholesaler and distributor of those vehicles. So as Mercedes-Benz USA, we do no production, we do no engineering, we do no design. If you're angry about the number of cup holders in your car, don't come talk to me. I can't do anything about it. But we do absolutely have influence over those types of things. But we really work hand in hand with, basically between us and kind of our German parent company to make sure that those vehicles get out in the right way. Now, you probably know who we are, but one of the things you may not know is that we've really been around since the beginning. So we can trace our lineage all the way back to 1886 with this little guy, this little 3-wheeled vehicle that is referred to as the patent motor wagon. And what most people don't know is that that is basically the beginning of the automotive industry right there. So, Mr. Benz, I'm drawing a blank on his first name at the moment. Good Lord. Brilliant engineer, patented this thing in 1886. But while he was a wonderful engineer, he was not very much of a marketer. And so people looked at it and they were like, this is great, this is interesting, but why do I want this to replace my horse? Why do I want this to replace my little carriage that my horse drags along with me? And so it basically sat for about 2 years until one day down the road, his wife decided to take a trip to their mother's house, to her mother's house. So early one morning, Bertha got up and went to the garage with their 2 young sons, got the car out of the garage, got the wagon out of the garage, got it started, took the roughly 60-mile trip to grandmother's house, drawing a lot of very interested stares from the village people along the way who had never really seen such a thing. Simultaneously being the first person to take a road trip, simultaneously also being the world's first car thief, seeing as how she did not tell her husband when she got up that morning that she was actually going to take this thing on the trip. On the way back, word spread. They had to stop along the way. They ran out of fuel. They had to actually meet with a local pharmacist to figure out how to get the fuel at that time that was required. They had to replace a fuel line along the way, or a radiator line along the way, using actually some of her hose to do that. Some from off of her dress. Also becoming the world's first roadside assistance. And that trip really kind of set the stage. Everyone then realized, oh my gosh, travel in this way was actually possible. And that's really, and so, for us, we look at that as saying, we've been innovating in the automotive industry all the way from the beginning. And that doesn't stop even until today. And so we have a history of innovations and legacy of things that we've always done, where we were the people that introduced a lot of these things into the car industry. Many of these things we own the patents on, and a lot of them we license out for literally a single dollar. From our viewpoint on it, it is not important about getting revenue as much as it is about just contributing to the industry as a whole. So this is by no means a comprehensive list, but this is just a fun list of things that are out there. My favorite lately is what we were referring to as Drive Pilot. So as of right now, this is the only SAE Level 3 system that's certified for operation in the United States. You can talk about Tesla Autopilot, you can talk about GM's Super Cruise and those types of things. This is the only actual automotive driving system that is allowed to be operated in the US, specifically in California and Nevada, where your hands do not need to be on the wheel, but you also don't even need to be looking at the road or looking at the vehicles that are next to you. You can be watching a video on the head unit of the car. You can be playing video games, and you are legally allowed to do so. Yes, you could do that in a couple of other cars. You might, if a police officer was being enterprising, they would actually pull you over, and there's nothing you can do about it. So that is a massive milestone for us. We're very, very proud of this. These cars will actually go for sale hopefully in the near future. I think we're targeting Q1 of 2024 for those vehicles to be released. We're really excited about the technology. It is utterly insane, the redundancy allowed in this. There are so many things, all the way down to their moisture sensors in the wheels to understand exactly what's going on in the road conditions. So it is incredibly nuanced and incredibly complex. And we're really proud of where that leads and where that goes. So we've had a history of doing this from the beginning, but we're not stopping even until today. But specifically, that's enough about us. I want to take us back to a time that we probably all might want to forget, which was 2020. I know, at the beginning of the year, we actually were having a really, really, really good year. And then, like most people, COVID came at us completely by surprise. And so by March and April, we were candidly in an absolute panic. The world had shut down, our dealerships had shut down, our factories had shut down, and we were scrambling to figure out what it is we were going to do. And so in a lot of ways, we were pretty frustrated. And one of the main reasons for that was the fact that our production facilities had also shut down. So the supply chain for these cars is incredibly complex, and it's really long. There are a lot of literal and figurative moving parts. And so what that created for us was a bit of a challenge. We had a number of people who actually had ordered cars. Now, in the United States specifically, the way our retail volume is most generally created is what's called a sell from stock model. Essentially, you go to a dealership, you look at the inventory that's available on a lot, and you're like, I'd like to go buy that car, and you drive it home that evening. You do have the opportunity to actually go order a car. You can say, I would like this exact car configured in this exact way, and I would like you to make that for me. And we're happy to do so if you're willing to wait a little while in order to get that vehicle. Not a problem. And where we see this happen quite often is with fleet deals. So like bulk orders from like a company where they're wanting to order like 10, 12, 13, 14 of them, maybe for their executive management or those types of things. And so we had a large number of orders where when we shut down the factories, but globally, not just in the US, but globally, those orders just didn't exist anymore. They were just canceled. There was no, oh, we'll get back to them, we'll delay everything down the road. It was just those cars now no longer exist. And so, as you might imagine, we had a number of really upset and very frustrated customers who had spent time configuring and ordering a vehicle, only to then be told, I'm sorry, there's a global pandemic, we're not going to do that anymore. And so that sent a poor guy that I worked with on a team into a scramble. What was he going to do? For him, it was literally, he was looking around just thinking everything is now canceled. And we all felt this way. We felt like we are completely frustrated. And as time went on, this was just longer and longer. But this individual was scrambling because he needed to actually have conversations with these people to be able to say, I'm sorry, we're not going to make your car. But ideally, can we find you a replacement? And this is really where we came into play. Because for him, this was like finding a 4,000-pound needle in a haystack. How do you go, at that point in time, we had roughly 70,000 cars in inventory. How do you go find the car that matches the one that had been canceled and that is close to the one that you ordered? Because yes, if you ordered a car, you might be willing to take something that's slightly different, but you presumably had an idea in mind. You presumably had a thing that you wanted to go order, right? If you're going and getting something from the store, and then they say, well, we're out of that, there's only so much substitution that you're willing to actually tolerate. So he was trying to figure out, how do I actually go through this process? And so he was doing it by hand, and it was a bit of a struggle, and it looked a little something like this. All of those orders actually showed up to him by just a PDF file. And you'll see an example of this later in a couple of slides. But literally, he was just receiving a PDF that said, here is the order that existed. Here's the details about it. Here's the configuration of that car with all the options that existed. So he would then go run a report in one of our systems to try to go look through, pick and find, here's all the cars that we have available in inventory. Once he had that, he would then be able to filter those results, but he would be doing it based on the options that he thought was most important. So, if I see a color, if I see wheels, if I see a specific package, he would go try to look for those things. So he was basically then just sorting all of those available options, looking for the ones that matched, then going and checking, where is that car actually in the world? Because these things actually physically exist in the real world. So where does that individual live? And that was literally him going to Google Maps and looking up where that individual was, and then trying to figure out how far apart is where does that person live compared to where that car, that if he can even find one that matches, where is that car in the world? And then lastly, trying to call that person and say, hey, unfortunately, we're canceling your order, but I hopefully have a replacement for you. Let me talk about it. Now, you might think to yourself, okay, that doesn't sound too painful. How hard can it really be to find a car that matches? Oh, you ordered one. Is there really that much out there in the world that can match it up that? So to give you a sense of scope here, one of our individual cars, and this is just the GLE, and we do a number of vehicles other than this, but this is one of our more popular SUVs. That car has 10 different paints, 7 different wheels, 3 different trim lines, 10 different upholsteries, 5 different individual interior trims on top of that. I'm not going to do the math for you, but suffice to say that's a lot, and that does not include any of the other accessories, options, anything else that may go in this car. We actually did do the math. There are over 1 billion ways in which you can configure one of these vehicles. So you could imagine the headache that this individual ran into when he was trying to sort through all of the other options that were out there to find that car that matches. The number is actually north of 3 billion, and it's so daggum large that I don't say it out loud because people are like, that number is so big, it can't be real. But trust me, it is. We've checked the math multiple times. But we just basically were like, look, it's over 1 billion. Trust us. That's a lot of ways in which you can configure a car. So our poor guy, his name is Daniel. And Daniel's going through this process and having to go through all of these individual steps for each individual canceled order. And it was manual for him, and it would take him anywhere from 1 to 2 hours. And then God forbid, he found a car that matched. He called that individual and they said, no, that's not really the one I'm looking for. Do you have one that has this on it instead? He would have to start this process all over again. And so he would then be like, great, you're going to need to give me another 2 hours. I'm going to have to go back and look through this. And this is in a window of time when these people are already really upset. And so speed is of the essence for us. And we want to make sure that we're getting these out to these people as quickly as we can. His boss, who also happened to be my boss, saw this process, asked us to meet, because usually when things were going bad, he would call me and say, is there something you can do? And this is literally a direct quote from him during the meeting. He literally just says, hey, after we reviewed the process, he said, hey, this stinks. Can you do something? I paused for a second and kind of chuckled and laughed at him and said, yeah, I can. We'll use Alteryx and we'll fix it. And so, long story short, this was the something that got created. Now, I'm not going to actually open the workflow today. There's really no need to go through it in detail and steps. We'll go through kind of the broad steps of what's actually happening here. If someone's interested, I am happy to go through that conversation later and we can pull it up. But we'll talk about kind of what it all does. And the reason that I love this workflow in a lot of ways is because it really does touch on almost every part of the platform. So we're bringing in a number of different files, which we'll talk about in a second. We mentioned we got them as a PDF, so we had to be able to actually, and that was the only way we could get them. We actually, once those orders were canceled, we actually could not get them out of our system anymore. And so we actually had to scrape them off the PDF to get the information, to get the configuration of the car. We were joining all that stuff together with multiple different data sets to see what was going on. Then doing a little nearest neighbor matching to find the closest available car. And then last and not least, these things existed in the real world. So we were then actually doing the geospatial work to figure out how far apart is the car that we have found versus the car that where this individual actually lives. Because in an ideal world, we'd also want to minimize our transportation expense to be able to take care of this person. And then lastly, because I'm lazy, we wrapped this whole thing in the interface so that I didn't have to keep reopening the workflow every time we had a new one of these to work for. I could literally just point the interface to the PDF every time I got a new one, run it, and then we would get the results out at the end of the day. So to talk through that in a little bit of detail, before we do so, one quick disclaimer. This is what I would call the epitome of duct tape data science. And so what I mean by that is it perfect? Absolutely not. It is not even close to perfect and could be refined in a lot of ways. Was it useful? 100%. Now, I'm not going to take credit for the phrase duct tape data science. There was a fantastic presentation that was done a couple of years ago at Inspire in the US. You can look for it if you literally just search for duct tape data science. You'll find the history for this. It's wonderful. It gives a great perspective on kind of like what I think is like real world actual data science as opposed to this idealistic, perfect academic scenario. And this to me is a wonderful example of doing something that gets there. And really the best way to summarize that is it was pragmatic, explainable, and results driven, right? We got there. Like I said, was it pretty? Was it perfect? No, but it got us to what we wanted for in that moment. And that's what I absolutely love about that. So to go into a little bit more detail, right? I mentioned we get the PDF. We were getting the orders by PDF. And so this is an example of one you can see down here below. And this was how he was receiving them. We had no record in our system of these anymore because of the way that they had gotten canceled. And our systems at that time were a little bit kind of archaic in order for us to actually access this information. And so, poor Daniel, he was just getting a PDF of this order has been canceled. Now go match that. And so there are codes here. I'm actually blocking them out just so that there's no need to worry about the individual codes themselves. But so poor Daniel was having to go through all that. We then took that and input that into the Alteryx workflow with a little bit of our code. Now, candidly, this was before the CV tools that existed in Designer. This was circa 2020, if you remember. So this was before the vision tools got introduced into the platform. But one of the things we were able to do is just very quickly point Alteryx the workflow to the PDF and say, hey, can you go scrape this data out of there and then get that out into a data frame that we can work with within our workflow? Now, I won't take credit for the R code. We actually borrowed that out of another tool that we had found on the gallery. It didn't work exactly for what we wanted to do. And this is one of the things I love about Designer in a lot of ways is so many of the tools that have been built are built with Alteryx tools. And so we were able to crack it open, get the pieces that we needed out of it, and bring that into the workflow that in a way that best suited our needs. In my mind, good artists borrow and great artists steal. And we were shameless about being able to go grab the stuff we needed and make that work. So that got us into a data frame where we said, okay, not only one, can we get out all the information as far as how this car has been configured, but then secondly, can we get the information with regards to that individual's address, their name, and the model of the car that they're looking for, which is also most important. From there, we needed to go access a certain number of files. And so at that point in time, our infrastructure was pretty bad, to be completely honest. We had a lot of things stored on network shares. So we had individual files that contained each individual, not each individual vehicle configuration. There wasn't a file for each individual vehicle, but each individual model, there was a file that contained, here's how each vehicle in that model family is configured. And so we need to be able to then point to the correct model file based on the PDF that was coming, and that they varied from model to model, and then be able to go input and be able to bring that into the workflow. So having that dynamic input along with that scraped from the PDF allowed us to dynamically go get the right input file from our network share to bring in the data, only the data that we needed and no more than that. So that was a fantastic addition. Once again, I'm really lazy. This is where the real fun happened though, right? And this is the nearest neighbor component of it. So essentially what you're doing is you're taking all the configurations of the car. You're taking all the features, all the packages, each individual paint code, each individual wheel code. And at that time, we basically just one hot encoded them into a table. So each individual option would be a column in the data frame to say ones and zeros. Does this car have this option? Did this car not? And so now we have a target car. Here's our car that we canceled. And we have all of the available inventory that exists for us. And so essentially the nearest neighbors does a little bit of math to essentially say, hey, what are the cars that are closest to this car in configuration using all of the options that exist, right? All of the various paint colors, of which a car can only have one, all the various wheels, all the various options of which the car may have more or one or many. And then from there, you can calculate a distance, right? And there's a number of ways in which you can actually calculate that distance, but you can calculate a distance score that effectively allows you to determine what are the cars that are the most closely match the target car that you're looking for. So inputting both of those into the tool, that was wonderful. We had to do next to no configuration at the end of the day. We basically just said we were feeding it into the tool and saying, okay, great, go do the nearest neighbors and give me the distance for each one of those. Now, once again, was this perfect? No. In one way in which it wasn't was we were one-hot encoding this entire thing. So a $50 option on the car carried the exact same weight as a $500 option or a $1,500 package that existed on the car. I probably care about a $1,500 package being on my car much more than I would, say, a $50 option or a $45 first aid kit, right? In that moment, we weren't worried so much about factoring in price as much as we were just being able to say, does this car match as close as we can possibly get it? That's where we'll let Daniel, who's doing the actual human work, kind of take that into account and figure that out from there. But it did what we needed it to do. And that's the biggest thing in that moment. We've since done later iterations of this where we actually did factor price into it. Literally, I thought, ironically enough, about 3 weeks ago, we had someone who was a friend of our chief legal counsel who wanted the exact car that he had. And the question was, I can't find it. Can you help me go find that car? And we were like, yep. So we kind of blew the dust off of this and we're able to make that work. This is exactly, if you're not familiar with nearest neighbors matching, this is exactly what happens when you watch Netflix or listen to Spotify. Spotify's done a ton of development in this work, ironically, interestingly enough. I find it hilarious that a platform that wants to find music that you want to listen to named their matching algorithm Annoy, by the way, until my daughter then found the Bluey soundtrack, and then I knew what he meant, because now Spotify feeds me nothing but Bluey songs left and right, and yeah, I am a little bit annoyed by that. But in my mind, is this exactly the use of the nearest neighbors kind of tool and method? No, but it does exactly what you want it to do. Often this is most done as a classification type of problem where you're trying to say, I have a bunch of known data. I have a known data point, but I don't know how to classify it. Can you tell me what it is most likely based on its other neighbors? In this scenario, we were almost doing it the other way around, where we had that point and we were looking for the available neighbors. We didn't really care how to classify it. So I'd probably paraphrase this in a different way, which is, yeah, use the proper tool, but sometimes use the one that suits your needs in that moment, right? If it gets it done, that's what's most important. Last and not least for us, this thing was, we lose sight of the fact in our home office, just to be candid, I lose sight of the fact that these cars actually exist in the real world. We talk about it in terms of we have 70,000 cars in inventory. That means there's legitimately 70,000 vehicles sitting on a dealer lot somewhere at one of these 383 dealerships in the US. And it's really easy to lose sight of the fact that these things actually exist out there. And as I mentioned, once we found them, we also wanted to wait out and manage how much could we minimize the actual transportation that exists. And so if we knew where that individual lived and we knew where those individual cars are because we know where all of our dealerships are, we can also factor that in. And this was something that no one expected when we originally got asked to do this. We realized, oh, Alteryx also is really fantastic at doing the geospatial analytics. So let's layer in on top of that the distance from that individual to where this, hopefully matching car actually is. And so maybe we can find one that's a little bit physically closer, but maybe isn't as great a match. Or if I've got two cars that are the exact same match, why don't I find the one that is physically closest so that we don't have to pay as much transportation expense in order to make this happen? That was so simple because we were able to geocode that using the existing tools in Alteryx, which was a massive win. And when we added that in, the aforementioned Daniel, he was like, dude, I don't know how you did this, but this was perfect, right? This added everything that I needed because he was literally having to go to Google Maps and just type in addresses and then figure out, okay, how far is this car versus that car versus the next car? And it just made it so repetitive and terrible. He showed me the process and like, I wanted to cry for him. I was like, dude, I'm so sorry. And we were able to add all that information in and it, it literally saved his day. I mentioned it earlier. I'm lazy. I don't want to do things a whole lot if I don't have to. And so one of the things that we then did was we wrapped this whole thing in a couple of interface tools. And this became just a desktop-based analytic app for us. We actually don't have Alteryx Server. That's one of the things that as an organization, we did not at the time want to commit to. And so if we had, I just would have done it this way and said, Daniel, here's your app. But instead, it just became, okay, hey, send me the PDF because I have the license. Send me the PDF, and then I will just open the analytic app locally, point the analytic app to the appropriate PDF so that I don't have to open the workflow, change the input tool, do a bunch of other things within the workflow to make that work. I then hit finish. 20 seconds later, I've got a result sitting on my desktop that I can then look at. I was a little paranoid, so I did want to check the results early on. The later result of this actually would then just automatically email the final results back off to Daniel, and I didn't even look at them anymore. We would just run it, and 30 seconds later, Daniel would get an email in his inbox that says, here's a copy of the PDF you sent. Here's the copy of all of the cars that actually match that out. I would call it lazy. I choose to prefer to think of it as I'm just really efficient. I don't want to take the time to do those types of things. And so wrapping all that in the analytic app was kind of the icing on the cake for us to be able to make this work really easily. I didn't have to worry about opening the program or making that work. I could just run it really, really quickly. So at the end of the day, what did that all really mean, right? Daniel was doing probably at the end of the day north of 75 to 100 hours of actual manual work. It was going to be painful. And this was at a time when speed really for us was of the essence, right? We needed to make sure that we got these things out very quickly. And we wanted to make sure that these customers were taken care of as fast as we could. So not only was it a speed thing for us, but it was also just, an utter and absolute pain for him to have to do these things. So we managed to do all that, and we managed to basically move all that down to about 20 minutes in total. The entire workflow would run in about 20 seconds, give or take. And so for us, when we got them, it was great. Take it, run it, get it out the door, we're done. So it was, and they were done sporadically. We didn't get them all in one big batch. So, over the course of a couple of weeks, we basically spent a grand total of probably an hour of total work, minus the process, including the processing time on just getting these things all back out, where he could then focus on the things that actually really mattered. Right. And we did it basically, the workflow was about a day total of actual development when it was all said and done with. So a little bit of iterations, but not a lot of changes from the original version of it. And it allowed the people that were out there to really focus on the things that really mattered. And that was for Daniel contacting the customers and having that difficult conversation with them and spending his time doing that, not spending his time searching for, a needle in a haystack, trying to find a car that may or may not match what the individual had originally ordered. So, the last thing I'll say, just to sum it up, and I do this a lot when we have conversations with people, and kind of my advice, right? Designer as a platform is ungodly versatile. And so, if there's a problem, odds are, and it's got any kind of data in it whatsoever, odds are you can figure out a way to solve it with the platform, right? And this was, proof positive of it to me, because this problem was so nuanced and had so many different pieces of it, and we were able to knock it out really, really, really quickly. The next thing I'd add is just don't be scared to just go in and explore. You're not going to break it, right? You're not going to break it, and you're not doing anything except processing all this stuff locally. So the only way you're going to find out what is in there is to actually go in there and poke around. That's the only way we figured out originally, like the whole nearest neighbors concept even existed, and that this was the thing that we could use. We had messed around with it one day to see what we thought we could do with it in a different use case, and then we realized, oh my gosh, this is the perfect solution for what we're looking for. The next thing I'd add on that is just knowing when good enough was good enough. As I mentioned, we weren't coding for like prices. We weren't accounting for paint colors, those types of things. Is a black car closer to a navy car, completely different from a white car, those types of things? We knew when to call it, right? We knew in that moment, we were like, hey, let's move forward. We've got a solution that for us is good enough and does what we want it to do. In that scenario, that's where I would say the results are greater than the technique, right? Some of this was abject brute force, but we were able to make it work. We weren't worried about trying to be elegant. We were really focusing on, can we actually get there? Because for us, speed in that moment was the most important thing. And then lastly, I'd say just turn the problems into an Alteryx problem. That was the way in which we learned how to do everything, right? Especially as you're new starting on the platform, if you are new starting on the platform in that journey, this was the way for us to learn, was like, okay, we've got a new problem. How do we do this in Alteryx? It forced us to learn, forced us to have to adapt, forced us to have to do a little bit of research to figure out what we thought the thing could actually do. And it made us much more versatile down the road as we move forward. That's the story in a nutshell. I know we wanted to do a little bit of question and answer, and I'm sure at this point you guys are tired of listening to me talk. Last but not least, these are the best ways to get in touch with me. My email is up there. I also exist on, I guess, what used to be known as Twitter, now X. If you want to see my boring tweets, mostly about golf and other random stupid things. And then obviously, if you want to find me on LinkedIn, that's one good way. Or you found this meeting, so you also know how to find me there as well. And Bart, Emil, guys, I think we were going to do a Q&A after this, and I'm happy to talk about
Yeah,
any or all of it.
that's right. Like from my perspective, that was just a fantastic presentation, very interesting, and the visual aspect was just great. So thank you very much for sharing that. I wanted to highlight one aspect which I see. This is like from my perspective, this is not a very usual Alteryx use case. And why? Because Alteryx is often used to solve some regular processes. And in that case, that's very interesting that it is like an ad hoc request. And in the end, you could use Alteryx for that with some crazy savings, I would say. 75 hours to 20 minutes, it makes the difference. So that's the comment from my side. Thank you very much for your presentation. And if there is anyone who'd like to ask a question to Neil, I think this is the time right now. So feel free to ask the questions.
Yeah, so I have a question. Great presentation. What was the main reason people rejected the cars that they offered to them? Because probably you know the answer, and I'm very curious.
That's a fun one because everybody's a little different, right? Some people were really worried about the packaging of the car, right? The actual, like, for lack of a better term, bells and whistles that existed. Does this car have, in the simplest terms, like heated seats versus a panoramic roof and those types of things? Those are really hard because, what's important to you is important to you, and there's no way that I can predict or know what that might be. Believe it or not, more often than not, it was mainly the paint color. It was, I want the car that, yeah, I want the white one, right? Find me a white one that is as close to my car as you can get me, as opposed to, yeah, I don't really care, or I'd be willing to accept one or two colors, even if it doesn't have, the right wheels or that kind of thing. It was fascinating as we dealt with it, the stuff that people did and did not care about. Occasionally you get the person that was just really, really, really stuck on one particular option that we didn't think was that important, but for some reason really mattered a lot to them. But you know what, you do you, and I'm not going to judge in any way, shape, or form because it's theirs. And lastly, I mean, to be honest, man, you're spending an extraordinary amount of money on these things, right? Let's not get it twisted. What we make is not the most, let's call it, cost affordable vehicle that's out there. We think it's totally justified. But if you're going to spend that amount of money, I want you to get what you want. And so in that regard, I don't blame them in that regard at all.
I see that there is a question from Rick. Any future uses of this workflow or ideas behind this workflow? For instance, helping dealers sell better by matching buyers.
We've talked about it, yes. I can say we've talked around, is there other ways to leverage this idea, matching buyers, helping dealers sell better? We've talked about it in terms of helping our dealers look for inventory as well. When they are looking for a particular car, is this a way for them to go about doing it? Because they go through the exact same thing. An individual walks into their dealership and says, I'd like to find a car that has this and this and that and that and that. Can you help me? Sometimes our systems aren't the best for that. So we've talked about a bunch of those different options. Can't confirm whether our future plans for any of that actually are though.
Thanks. And is there any other comment or question from the audience? If not, we have prepared a short presentation from Emil as well. But before we'll do that, I just wanted to ask if there is someone who'd like to ask the question.
Please don't be shy, because we don't have so interesting use cases very often. At least I think we have, but this is very unusual. And
yeah,
If not, I will, because Neil mentioned that he's very lazy. I'm very lazy as well. And we in DataPal, we are all very lazy and we are doing our best to be very, very efficient. And we also are training providers and we provide trainings around best practices, but not only that. And during one of those trainings, we are sharing, in my opinion, very interesting macro that saves me a lot of time while working with customers or when I'm working as consultant or data analyst. Basically, quite often I'm in the situation where I have one data set, and this is a very small data set because this is just an example. And someone is asking me, okay, I don't see a client in the output of the report, for example. And I would like you to check what's the reason behind it. And usually what I was doing is I search for join, put it on the workflow somewhere, deleted the connection because I need to put the join somewhere to make it work, and add, for example, a text input tool with information that this is my, for example, a store ID, and connecting it, configuring that, and then, you know, connecting the dots. And it's not a big problem if you have only one place that you need to do it. But if you have a couple of databases that you would like to, for example, filter only for one account, that can be painful. And especially if you want to change something in the workflow afterwards, because, okay, maybe the workflow isn't working perfectly now, so I need to change something. But to change something, I need to close the workflow, reopen it, then make a change, save it, and do the exercise again to double check if everything is working correctly. So instead of that, we have a macro in place that is using one of not very commonly known about functionality, which is constants of the workflow. Basically, we in the workflow have couple of capabilities which aren't very often used. There are some constants which are static. And for example, one of them is engine workflow directory. And when I will run the workflow, I will get information where the workflow is located. Can be pretty handy. But there are a couple of them. All of them are available here. But for our exercise and for our macro, we are using a constant that is created by us. Basically, there is a magic button here that I will use first to delete this constant, and I will create a new one. It's called running test. And if this, I can configure it and put a value. If the value will be yes, my workflow, my macro will work. If the value will be no, my macro will not work. I will put it first as a no, and I will run the workflow. Basically what happens here, I have 7 records. Maybe I will minimize that. How to do that? Okay, I have 7 records here. And on the output, I also have 7 records. Nothing changed, nothing has happened. But if I will change it and change it to running test to yes, and I will run the workflow, my output file will be generated only with one particular record. I can put more. And for me, it's very efficient because I don't need to change anything, connect anything. The only thing that I need to do is change here, made a really quick change, run the workflow, and it still works perfectly without any problems. And when someone is very lazy, 1 second, please, you can specify the field's name and everything. You don't need to, like, if my dataset will change, or in my dataset I have more IDs, maybe I have another one that I would like to use instead of the first one. So instead of changing anything here and reconnecting it, I can just change this field to map a different field, run the workflow. Okay, nothing happened because I need to change the constant to yes. And now I get only 3 records. So I see that there was some questions. No. So any questions to me about the workflow which I shared over?
I think that there are questions to Neil all the time. Neil,
Yeah.
the stage is yours.
Good.
Lisa is asking about the Alteryx Cloud.
We are considering it. Yeah, we haven't done so yet. We are in the middle of a few other transitional things on the back end in our infrastructure, but we're talking about it, and we're excited about the idea of it and what it potentially brings for sure.
Thanks, Neil.
And any other Alteryx users are interested in the cloud? That we have Nick Waters, which is Alteryx Cloud expert from the Alteryx. But if there are any users interested, we can maybe create a next presentation could be around the Alteryx Cloud.
I would love that. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, we will think about it. Actually, we were discussing it to have some additional activities around the cloud in the next year because it's interesting topic to many of our clients, and I think not only our clients overall, there are people which are very interested in the product. But thank you, Lisa, for joining. And
yeah, thank you very much. And I think we have 30 minutes left. And I suggest that, Emil, if you could present this comparison workflow which you prepared as well, it would be interesting, I believe, for people to see how to have the universal solution to compare 2 data sets in the same time.
sure, I will do a quick demo, but I think, yeah. Do you see my screen now?
Yeah, we can.
Awesome. So the second thing which I think very often needs to be done by people working with data and with Alteryx is comparing 2 different data sets. Quite often when someone needs to automate a workflow, automate a process, they have an input file. Let's say this is a first input. And after the automation is done, we are comparing it to the manual output done by someone else. And this can be challenging. And also in financial world, quite often we need to compare what sits in 2 databases. And we would like to do that in dynamic way because probably it would be good to do this track on daily basis just to ensure that all the data is matching. And basically, I will start from the end because one of the workflows, one of the solutions can show us high-level information about the main, let's say, columns which we would like to compare. Number of records and the difference, like the size, the numeric value difference, and the amount of records which are different. High-level overview like that can give us a brief understanding how far we are from the perfect situation where the both data sets will match. That might not always be the case, but it's good to have at least a high-level understanding. But quite often when we have this view, we know that there are differences, but it's very important to identify them and to know what are the problems with the data. So basically, we have a second solution, which is also dynamic, that is putting the data in a very, let's say, user-friendly way. We have a column called data discrepancies, and data discrepancies highlight us where we have a problem with the data. So for those rows that we have here, all of them are having problems with country columns. The workflow itself, a step earlier, is showing where we got the data discrepancies and how many lines are problematic. And usually when we are working and investigating a data, we would like to first investigate the most common problem, because if we will correct it, those values that are here will look much better. And that's our goal. It will sound much better if we will say to our boss that the difference is 1% than 8%, for example. So here we have a quite simple solution that is showing like first record from the top. And in the ideal world, I would be able to, let's say, correct it and clean the data. But if I'm not able to do that, maybe I am interested in looking into the second row instead of the first. And run the workflow once more, compare the data, look at the differences. Okay, profit is the problem. I have a transaction ID. I can look in the source system to investigate this further. So this is just another way how you can use Alteryx to solve your problems in a dynamic way to make your life a little bit easier.
And I think that there is one big advantage of this solution, and you didn't mention about that, Emil. It doesn't matter how many columns you have in your data set. This is like a dynamic solution. So if you have two different data sets rather than this, which is presented by Emil right now, it will still work. So that's the pure magic, I would say, for that.
Yeah, quite often just what is important if you are working with the data and you see that you have a problem that you encounter very often, it's a good idea to spend an hour or two or even a couple of days in order to automate it, to make your life a little bit easier, like Neil did with his analytical app. And, you know, instead of changing the data input, he prepared an application to make his life a little bit easier. Each small step that you will eliminate will make your life much, much easier, especially in really busy times, because that's when we really are very happy that we have some spare time.
So thanks for sharing that, Emil. If anyone have some questions, technical questions, or just normal questions, we are happy to answer those.
If not, it's time to wrap up. And thank you for the presentation, Neil. It was amazing. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure that the rest of the audience enjoyed this as well. Thank you everyone for joining. It was a pleasure to having you, and see you next time.
It was an amazing presentation, but your case, Emil, also was really, really nice. I like it.
Thank you.
We'll send the recording to you. Thanks.
Cheers.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.